Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Funding Our Library Future, a conversation about the Boulder Public Library System and what a sustainable future could look like for our libraries. We're here tonight in the Canyon Theater at the main library, and from here to the little corner library up where I live in North Boulder, to the historic Carnegie Library, the neighborhood branches of Meadows and George Reynolds, we know that throughout the community our libraries are well loved. So well loved, in fact, that usage of our libraries has grown much faster than the funding. So our guests this evening are going to share some statistics about that, but suffice it to say that the library is serving a lot more people with fewer staff and a budget that, when adjusted for inflation, has remained basically flat since 2002, so almost 20 years. So what can we do? How can we meet the needs of the library, the increasing demand for service, take care of the facilities, continue to innovate? We're going to talk about some options tonight, and in particular, the option that has been recommended by the Boulder Library Commission and is in use in many other parts of Colorado. That's a model of funding and governance called a library district. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm Sam Fuqua. I'm your moderator tonight. I'm on the school board, and I was formerly a member of the Boulder Library Commission and the Boulder Library Foundation board as well. We have a terrific panel tonight, all of them library lovers, and I will introduce them to you going left to right. First of all, this is David Farnan, who is the Boulder Library and Arts Director. Good evening, David. And then two guests from Fort Collins, Mary Atchison and Robin Gard. Both were involved in the 2006 creation of the Poudre River Library District, which grew out of the city of Fort Collins library system, and we're going to hear from them about the history of that effort. They also have a long history of involvement libraries at the state and local level. Mary and Robin, thank you for coming down from Fort Collins. Tim O'Shea is with us, Vice Chair of the Boulder Public Library Commission. Hi, Tim. And then from the State of Colorado Library, library consultant Crystal Schimpf. Hi, Crystal. We're going to dialogue with the panelists for a while, and then 45 minutes to an hour roughly within the conversation, we'll open it up to audience questions. And just ask you to raise your hand and say your question. I'll repeat it into the mic when we get to that point. But to start with, let me ask you, Tim, and then I'll ask David for some context as well. Why are we talking about this now? What is the state of the Boulder Public Library system?
Great question, Sam. And truth be told, we've been talking about this, as you can readily recall back in your days of being a commissioner for quite some time. The reality is the Boulder Public Library has been underfunded for upwards of about 20 years. The city has made cuts over the course of the last several decades to the library's staff and budget, and we really haven't seen a return of those funds. Meanwhile, the growth and success that you mentioned in your beginning comments of the library has continued to put us in a point where it's clear that there's community desire for library services, and that's beyond just books and periodicals. We're seeing an increase in programming and attendance to all of the events that we see happen here at the library. Our Building 61 makerspace is introducing new forms of literacy. So we're at this funny nexus of being very successful at serving community needs and desires, but looking ahead into the future and thinking about the launch of the North Boulder branch, which has been promised for some time, and really thinking about how do we sustain the quality and the character of the Boulder Public Library system. The reality comes down to the fact that the money just isn't there to keep up the quality of service without making cuts or thinking about how to shuffle already strained branches and staff. And so the question becomes, when do we reach fully sustained funding for the library? And we've been asking that question of the city for quite some time. And though they've made efforts, we really haven't seen a commiserate response to give us the future that the community is really demanding for this system.
David, what's your perspective? You've been library director for about 5 years now?
That's correct, Sam. Yeah, and we just, so I think the impetus for the conversation this time around really has been our 2018 master plan. So we spent the last couple of years really talking to the community about what their hopes and dreams were for the library and what the needs were for the library. Obviously, The North Boulder Library came up again, as well as library services to Gun Barrel and some other surrounding areas. Just things that we could do, all of which cost money. And the reality when we began digging in is that, as you said, the funding hasn't changed substantially since 2002, is as far as we really tracked that back. But I've recently been doing a lot of research, so I think the first time the district idea came up for the city of Boulder was in 1981. Marcely Gralip, who I'm sure many of you remember, and, or maybe some of you even knew, passed away recently, as I was going through her scrapbook and finding mention in 1981 of putting a mill on the thing and the library becoming a district then. So the conversation has been going on a long time. I think the master plan, the impetus for the master plan is just really gauging the kind of aspirational needs that the community has. Boulder has grown more than 16% in those 20 years, just in the terms of population. You know, the volume of city services has grown much more even than that, because as a community grows up, the residents want more and more services. So the city has devoted a lot of money and growth to roads, to the idea like of a municipal utility. A number of different ideas have come along in those 20 years, which have been priorities for the city. And the library just hasn't risen to that level of priority for the city in the last 20 years.
Explain where the library gets its money currently.
So 80% of our funding comes from the general fund. So the general fund is primarily generated by sales tax. It's a revenue on sales tax. It goes into a general fund, which is for the city. And then the city distributes that money out among a bunch of different departments. Roughly 15% of our revenue now comes from a property tax, which was approved in the late 80s. It's a 0.333 mils of your property tax. So for an average homeowner in Boulder, you're probably paying around $20 a year. And that now constitutes, at the time it was done, it constituted about 4% of the budget. Now it constitutes about 15% of the budget. The rest of it comes from revenue, book sales, overdues, fines, that kind of thing.
But the vast majority is general fund money from sales tax.
That's correct.
So Tim, the Library Commission studied different funding scenarios in the context of also studying the master plan and where you want to be. Share an overview of some of the options you looked at, and then we can move into why the commission landed on the district model.
Certainly. So the commission's been trying to help solve this problem and really understand where sustained funding from the library.
Can you please speak in the mic?
Sure. Where sustained funding from the library could be found. And we're in an interesting kind of tug of war. As David laid out, the majority of money comes through the general fund, which is derived from sales tax. We've seen flattening of sales tax at the city level, so there's been stress in trying to find more money to put into the library system. And one area that we worked closely with the city to try to explore and is still being examined by council and by city staff is this notion of, can we find more money within the budget and allocate that toward the library? The challenge there is that if sales tax revenues remain flat or fluctuate enough, there's just not a lot of money in that bucket. And then that 0.33 mil levy is dedicated funding. The challenge that we run into is that if the city were to allocate more dedicated funds through property tax, we come up against a mill levy limit that's been set within the city charter since, I guess, in the 40s, and that limit is about 13 mils. The city right now is at 11.98 mils, so trying to fund the sustainable future of the library isn't within that ceiling. We hit that limit. And as the commission really began digging deeper into this through the course of the master plan, we realized that we're kind of stuck. We can't raise a dedicated property tax within the city level. There has been some discussion from city council members, and I know staff is continuing to look at what's possible if there were ways to reallocate the budget. The challenge there is that the library just doesn't usually end up at the top of the list. The city is interested in a lot of ambitious projects, and quite often that draws all of the the air out of the room in discussions and certainly in budget planning. And the library is kind of relegated to nice to have, but we're not going to dedicate the money necessary when we're trying to solve problems like housing affordability or looking at a municipal utility. So the commission really began looking back into history and seeing that districting's been discussed, and it's a problem that's been solved in other parts of the state of Colorado and certainly around the country. And we put a lot of effort in just this past fall to working with a financial consultant to really break down what we were hoping would be a very clear apples to apples comparison of what it costs to fund our library. That wasn't an easy question to answer. And the city, in fact, didn't really have that answer either. So it was a very educational process. And in our November study session with City Council, we really were able to identify that it costs about $16 million, almost $17 million annually to run our library system. In order to move in the direction of sustainability and ideally move into the direction where we'd like to go with our master plan, we need to raise funds from a broader source. And that's where the district concept really solves the problem. It gives us a larger patron base and a dedicated property tax across a population that can help support the funding for the library and provide a more equitable and broader representation of the community that's using the library system beyond just the city border and the city limits. I think I've touched on a few points there, but I'll hand back to you.
And we'll get into all those in more detail, but let me turn to you, Crystal Schimpf, a public library consultant, State of Colorado Libraries. What is a library district, and is this common in the state of Colorado?
Sure, that's a great question, Sam. And you alluded to this at the beginning as you were introducing this topic. So a library district is one of several different structures for public libraries in Colorado, and that is regulated through statute in Title 24. A library district is the type of library district or the type of public library in which the governance has the most independent autonomy. It is actually a special district of sorts, and that means that the board of the library actually handles the governance as opposed to the city or county or several municipalities or counties joined together. We have 113 public libraries in Colorado, and of those, 55 are library districts at this point. So that's about 49%. And it has become a common choice for public libraries to go in because they are able to focus on having a sole funding source through property taxes. They're able to focus on the efforts of public library services, which sometimes differ from the goals of a city or county in general. And so they're able to strategically plan for their own goals as a public library to provide that public service to people. And it gives them more sustainable planning. They're able to see through that property tax revenue what they're able to plan in the long term. So that's what we're seeing at the state level at this point.
Is there any data showing which is a more stable model? Like, are the districts able to provide services, staffing at a more consistent level than, say, a municipal model? Or has the state done any studies of that or any comparisons?
Sure. Well, we do take public library data through a report annually. And in looking at that data, we have seen over time that library districts are generally better funded. They have a higher per capita level of funding is what I mean by that. And library districts also provide a higher level of service to the community, which can be seen in the circulation statistics, the program attendance data, the number of people who visit the library on an annual basis, and also the amount of computer use as we look more towards technology in libraries. So we certainly see a higher level of those services being received by the community.
Well, before we come back to how this might look in Boulder and some of those points Tim raised, I want to turn to Mary Atchison and Robin Gard to tell us about what happened in Fort Collins in Larimer County, the history of the formation of the district there, and a little more about how that worked, what the library looked like before, what it looks like now, because you're more than 10 years into this, right?
Great. Well, Am I still on? Everybody can hear me? Okay. I'm going to start because I was on the library board when the library was still part of the city, and then transitioned onto the Board of Trustees once we became a district. So I'm going to talk about the dark clouds that were swirling over the library in the late 90s and early 2000s that caused us to take a really hard look at the district and ultimately resulted in the community moving forward in forming the district. I was appointed to the library board, I don't know, maybe 96, and at that time, as I alluded to, the dark clouds were swirling. The county had originally, like back in the 40s and 50s, had its own library, and then it combined with the Carnegie Library, the City of Fort Collins Library, under a contract. So the library was performing a contract for services to county residents. And the county, in the late 90s, was paying the library $200,000 a year to provide those services. So those, just as in Boulder, the library was supported by sales taxes from the city. And so that was sort of what we called the county resident portion for paying for library services. At that time, the county had put into their plan that they were going to stop paying the library for services. So that was $200,000 a year that we were losing from our budget. In addition, similar to what Tim said, the library was not competing well against police and fire and roads and other things that city residents expect from their community. And so the city of Fort Collins actually made that official. They developed a 3-tier funding priority model where tier 1 was police, fire, roads, utilities, those kinds of things. I can't remember exactly what was in tier 2, maybe neighborhood services and some other things. And the library and all the other cultural services were in tier 3. So that was officially built into the budgeting process. So that was another big dark cloud that we could see on the horizon, which ultimately resulted in the city making cuts to the budget. And at that time, I checked what our population numbers were. So in 1990, the population of the city of Fort Collins was 90,000. And in 2005, our district was voted on in 2006. In 2005, it was 137,000 people. So our community grew by almost 50,000 people when the county was cutting our budget, the city was cutting our budget. So at that time, the library had already cut hours, they had cut positions, we had drop boxes all over the community so people could return their books, and everybody loved that. They had cut the drop box service because we couldn't afford the staff to go out and take care of the drop boxes. Our story times were packed. The library was very well loved in Fort Collins, and it was very, very poorly funded. We had books in the children's section from the 1970s that had, you know, maps with names of countries that didn't exist anymore, with, you know, scientific facts that weren't facts anymore. It was an embarrassment, actually. And so, you know, we knew that we needed to figure out another way to go. And that's really the, you know, landscape that we were facing as we started talking very, very seriously about a district. So we had signatures that we obtained from the public. The city council was not thrilled with the concept of letting the library go. They weren't sure what would happen, who would control it, would we go rogue? You know, what would we do with the money? There were a lot of questions that nobody really said in public, but there were a lot of concerns on the minds of the council. And in addition, we had one council member in particular who had a hard time favoring it because he was seeing that there were creation of a lot of special districts, the fire district, and we have a health district, and we have the school district, and we have all these districts. And he felt like that was governing by district as opposed to, city council being able to control the big picture. So there were a lot of reasons that council was not thrilled with this, although they did recognize that if we became a district, that the funds that they were putting towards the library would go back into their budget, would go back into the general fund, because then the funding for the library would come out of the mill levy and the property taxes. So they had, some mixed feelings. I'm going to turn it over to Robin to talk a little bit more about, we were both part of the campaign. We were both members of the initial board of directors, so we can talk about that later if that's a question that people have,
So we have been where you are at a crossroads where you're wondering what the future of the library is. One of the things we found in studies over the years, people's love for libraries, which most people love libraries, let's face it, it doesn't necessarily translate into a commitment to fund those. And you see those starting with city council. They love the library, they love having control over the library, but they often can't find the money to actually make that meaningful, to support library services. So we were very fortunate in Fort Collins. We won the first time out on our ballot issue. A ballot issue, as I'm sure you know, is very labor intensive. You have to gather signatures, you have to do advertising, you have to come up with campaign points, but we had a great crew there. I think we won with 67% of the vote. Our budget was between $3.5 and $4 million in 2006 before that library district passed. The first budget that we passed as a governing board was $7.5 million. So you can see that that is a dramatic difference. In the meantime, the city had been collecting impact fees to build a new branch library, which was very badly needed in Fort Collins. But the conundrum was that we would have been able to build that library, but not to open it, staff it, or supply it with materials had the ballot issue not passed. So immediately we opened a new branch library. After a careful study, we restored 16 positions that had either been cut or had been allowed to remain unfilled due to attrition. We restored the drop boxes, which was a big part of the campaign. We created a magnificent outreach department at our library, which was one of the things we were not able to do before. And before a couple years was out, we also were able to complete a major renovation of our main library without going back to the voters again. So before and after.
What did the asset transfer look like? Because that's something that's come up as we've discussed this in Boulder. We got these beautiful facilities that paid for by Boulder tax money.
And that's a huge issue to city staff. We were in negotiations with the city. Our situation in Fort Collins is kind of interesting. One of our libraries sits on state land because it's run in conjunction with the community college there, Front Range Community College. The new library that we opened was part of a condo agreement because it was in a retail shopping center. And then there was the main library. And Mary, I'm going to let you talk about the negotiation. It took us a full year to negotiate with the city for the IGA.
We felt like it was very important for the library district to own the facilities, because that allowed us to control them, to control our future, to control what we decided to do with those facilities in the future, whether we expanded them, whether we moved them, whatever we did or needed to do for the public. The city wasn't so thrilled with that idea. They were a little concerned about turning over these facilities that had been paid for through city funds over a long period of time. So we formed a committee, 2 people from the library board and 2 people from the city, negotiated that out. As Robin said, it took quite a long time to do. And it resulted in an intergovernmental agreement where certain properties were handed over from the city to the district. The city kept a couple of properties that we hadn't built on, but that had been paid for through funds that were dedicated to the library. So some money changed hands, funds that had been reserved for library services through our sales tax. The city has a impact fee that they collect on every residential property. And so the city continued to collect those impact fees until our new branch was built, because they ended up paying for it even though we were a district. So it kind of got complicated. But we ended up, and at this time, own all of the facilities, all of the properties, all the books, everything. And it is just a much, much cleaner process.
It's really good background, thank you. I was thinking, Crystal Schimpf from the State of Colorado Libraries, have districts always been successful when put to the voters? And although it was a lot of hard work, sounds like it's worked out well in Larimer County. They tried this in Jefferson County, right? Didn't quite work out as well.
Yeah, so in nearly all cases, when put to the voters, actually, as far as I know, when put to the voters, when it's gone to ballot, in every case, a district has been formed. Now, I don't have a backlog of all of the history of this, but to my knowledge, they've always passed. There is a case in Jefferson County where twice they looked at, they explored, they were in the same position where they explored going to the voters to become a district. They never went to ballot in both cases for that. So they were also looking at financial challenges and wanting more autonomy. I do not actually know the circumstances why they didn't go to ballot, but that is one case where, you know, it didn't pan out. They decided to stay as a county library system.
We'll bring it back to Boulder. Tim O'Shea and David Farn, let me ask you, you know, despite the flat funding, the fewer staff, you hit 1 million visitors, right, in 2018. You know, you got this great maker space. This theater looks great. Got a little service up in North Boulder. I mean, isn't what we have good enough? It's working out pretty well, it seems, to many observers.
I don't want to steal David's thunder because I have to give credit to David Farnan and the incredibly dedicated and talented staff of our library system. They continue to amaze and surprise and really do more with less. So what we're seeing is the result of an incredibly dedicated staff and leadership to build the best library with the resources and materials that are available. I think the piece that becomes a bit of a struggle is saying that there is a problem, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed learning from Robin and Mary and the experiences in Fort Collins is that we're very much, I think, in a similar situation where there's a North Boulder branch promised to this community where money has been allocated to build that property, but we're not able to staff it. We're not able to program it. And so we could build a building, but we can't make that building a library without the staff and the programs and the services that our community has come to expect without this sustained funding. My concern is, as we saw with the recent potential cuts to the Carnegie branch, the city could pull back and say, well, close a branch or cut back on services. If you want to fix a funding problem, here's ways to do it. So I think that there's a problem on the horizon. And I think that other commissions have seen this problem and they brought it to the city's attention. And we have the political theater and the dialogue, and we're patted on the back for running a great library. What I've seen through this process is the library really is a model for fiscal responsibility. They measure not just twice, but probably about 6 or 7 times before they make a change. If you want good information, if you want good details, you're gonna find it at the library and through librarians. They really wanna be right and accurate on this. And I think it's been a great process of education for certainly the commission in response to community demand, but also for city council and for staff to say, hey, here's what it costs to run a library, and here's what it looks like in the future if we don't put sustained funding on the table. And I'll hand over to David to clarify or
Well, so as an opening caveat, I mean, I've been in libraries and running libraries for about 25 years, and I don't think I've ever worked in a library where I thought, like, we've got enough money. You know, it's like I never had that feeling. So libraries are extraordinarily resilient. I mean, the amount of change that has just happened in the last 20 years has been profound. But, I mean, indeed, you're correct. I mean, whenever I cite statistics and start getting into the data, people say, it sounds like you're whining, and I'm not whining. I am extraordinarily proud. I believe the staff is extraordinarily proud. of what we've accomplished with the limited amount of resources we've got, and what we've accomplished is profound, right? So, you know, in the short time I've been here, in 5 years, we've seen like a 20% increase in new borrowers, new people getting library cards and checking out. We've seen close to a 60 or 70% increase in program attendance, 600% increase in the summer reading program. Circulation continues to go up, ebooks continue to go up, and we're doing it with fewer staff. And so, like, when you look at the comparisons, if you go back to 2002, where Boulder's population was, 16 to 20% less, we've seen profound growth over that same period of time, and we're doing it with, I think, it's roughly 18 fewer FTEs. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm deeply appreciative, and there's a couple of staff members here. I'm deeply appreciative of the work that they have done. The reality is in the last 5 years, we've gone through, I think, 4 major reorganizations. There's not one person's job, including my own, which hasn't changed. And we're continuing to try to scramble to meet the need. There's a high degree of aspiration in the community. People keep coming through the doors. Library use is not in any way declining. I don't know when it ever did. Now we're seeing surveys that show that the highest usage of public libraries is among millennials. The highest aspirations for public libraries are among Latino populations. Like all the data shows that like public libraries are going to be like even more pivotal in 10 years. And the question is not whether is it good enough. The question is this sustainable? Right? So are we in a position where it's going to sustainably meet the needs of the community? And that's, I think, the question really that the commission is grappling with now, that the folks up in Fort Collins were grappling with 10 years ago, because it doesn't frankly seem like it, right? So we have impact fees as well. We have $5 million approved by the voters to build a North Boulder library. We have zero commitment at this point of where staffing is going to come from to do it. Now, I feel confident, because I'm a hopeful person, that that will happen, right? It's going to happen. Somehow we'll open that building. But then what about Gun Barrel? Gun Barrel has also wanted a library since the 80s for 40 years. So how do we accomplish that? There are other areas that are probably underserved within our community, and it's difficult for me to understand how I plan for that without having at least the secure resources to realize that like next year we're not going to be making cuts. So it really comes back to the sustainability question and finding stable funding which we can count on in the future.
So the commission has identified and is advocating for the district as a sustainable funding model. Let's talk a little bit more about who is accountable under that model. And I might turn to you first, Crystal, and then ask Mary and Robin to talk about how it works in Fort Collins. I think I know how it works here in the city of Boulder. There's library staff with a director who answers to the city manager. City manager answers to our elected representatives on the city council. How does it work with a library district?
Well, with a library district, you have a governing board, which is different than the board here in Boulder for municipal or county library, which is typically an advisory board that may have some authority to make decisions. But in a library district, the board is responsible for making the decisions around policy making, setting budget, and working with the director on those issues. And there is actually then a clear line between the library director, who is in charge of the operations of the library. And so there's a close relationship, I think, between the director and the board in a library district, but ultimately the board itself is accountable. I should also say that the library board for a district is appointed, and that there's typically a bylaws that rules the meeting process and their procedures, and all of that follows all of the statute for state of Colorado for open meeting law and for special districts. So it's all something that is governed very clearly by the state as well. So I think, does that clearly answer?
Yeah, and so that's how it works in the Poudre River District?
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. What happens in the Poudre River Public Library District is that there's a subcommittee of City Council and the Board of County Commissioners. It started out as 2 people from each organization. Now I think it's down to 1 each that meet with candidates for the Board of Trustees and appoint the Board of Trustees. And they take advice from the Board of Trustees in terms of what the board feels like it needs, who would be a good fit, those kinds of things. They listen to the board. That doesn't sway them necessarily, but they meet every year and appoint new members as they go on rotation. But it's worked out very well for us. We've had a very diverse board from the very beginning, and people with great skills and great experience running large companies, running universities, people who have formerly been part of government. So it's been really great to see the talent that's involved. The library board district is accountable to the public, just like a school board or others. All of our records are public. The meetings are open. The public has public comment period, just like a city council does. And it works very, very well. The key is to make sure that you get good candidates for the board. And so we every year go out and recruit really good people from the community to be part of that pool.
I would say one other thing that's not really obvious in this is if you go to a district, instead of having several layers between the public and their library, you have a dedicated group, in our case, of 7 people, and that's their focus. They care about libraries. They want the libraries to be absolutely the best that they can be. And so it's hard to quantify that, but that's really important that you have this really small dedicated group, and that's what they do. They're not concerned with any of the other things that city government is concerned with. They are there for the libraries.
And I think you said earlier, Mary, in the off chance that somebody might go rogue, I don't know what that looks like for librarians, but if they got off track, ultimately there is an elected official accountable because you have the city council and the county commissioners doing the appointing. Right?
Right, that's true. And you know how the board functions is in statute. And we have, at every board meeting, probably for the first 4 years, we had an attorney that the district paid to sit with us and make sure that we followed all of the rules, all the procedures, from the budget to the employment policies to everything else according to statute. So,
And I wanted to come back to that point about, you know, the idea of what if the library went rogue. And just to put out there that, there's a whole set of values and ethics that public libraries adhere to, which come from the American Library Association. And we also have public library standards here in the state of Colorado that are put out by the state library. And we provide training for boards and directors and library staff on those standards and how to meet them. And so it's very unlikely, and in fact, we haven't seen any instance where a public library has gone rogue and gone off on its own mission. The missions are all driven by Public Library Service, which has a history in the United States. And so that's just one thing that I think is worth noting, that even though it's a public library district, now it's being removed perhaps from a city or county government, that there are still standards there that drive the service and a very high values, very, very high level of ethics for that service.
Thank you. And Tim O'Shea, as the Boulder Library Commission looked at the district model and decided to recommend it, did you get that deep into it? Like, would the appointments to the board mirror what Mary and Robin described in Poudre River, some appointed by city council, some by the Boulder County commissioners, presumably?
Certainly that's a possibility. Really, the process of forming a district gives us, the community, the opportunity to really understand what it looks like to have broad representation on that Board of Trustees, on that leadership. And one aspect of this that I think is compelling to me is that our neighbors in Gun Barrel would have a potential voice. The service footprint of the district could have representation, so it's not just city representation dictating the services. As we've looked at the IGA, the intergovernmental agency, the formation of the leadership for the district, that's a great opportunity for the city to have a voice. And I know that when we presented our study session in November to council, a number of council members were very interested in what it might look like to create that leadership and what voice the city might have. I'm excited that it's an opportunity for our community of library supporters and certainly representation of patronage to have potentially a seat at the table. And I think it's a very important part of district formation to really put together a thoughtful and responsible board of trustees. And certainly we have representation of that here from our Fort Collins neighbors, that really shapes that not just sustained funding for the library, but that vision for library service in the future. And whether or not they go rogue is up to Boulder to decide.
Well, say a little more about that service boundary. You've drawn at least a tentative boundary for this district?
There is a tentative boundary working with county commissioners, and our current boundary would expand upon the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan to incorporate Niwot, Gun Barrel, and extending up into Sunshine Canyon with a bit of extension into the canyon leading up to Nederland. We do not currently in our boundaries impinge upon any existing library services. So Nederland's not impacted, Lafayette, Longmont, they're all still independent and operating as they would. It also incorporates, I think I used a number saying 90% earlier, it's closer into the sort of 80s, but the actual patrons that come through and use the library or that have library cards, the households that are using the Boulder Public Library system would be incorporated in those boundaries. Those boundaries are based on precincts as well, so that when a potential ballot is floated, voting is within the boundaries of existing precincts as well.
David, how many of the library patrons come from outside the city limits of Boulder?
Oh, you know, we've used the number, it's about 40,000. So, and that's odd in Colorado, right? So we have a disproportionate number of patrons who are outside the city limits. And that kind of speaks to the role of Boulder as a regional hub. So I don't know what the real numbers are, but estimates of between 30 and 60,000 people traveling to Boulder every day for work. So a lot of those people they work for the city, they work at different jobs. We pick them up as library customers. We also honor library cards from anywhere around in the area. So it's a lot of people because of the fact that Boulder is such a regional hub, I think. The numbers we're looking at now, I think in the broader district, and if I can say, I think what the commission's intention was to align the funding base with the user base as nearly as they could. And so we get to probably around 84%, 85% of the user base, the card holders, by incorporating areas of the mountains, Gun Barrel, Niwot, and then north of the city limits of Boulder as well.
So you looked at where the current patrons live, and
yeah, and the map itself is very hypothetical at this point. It was drawn. We initially had put together a map, which was the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, and then the recommendations to extend that boundary came either from City Council or from the county commissioners. And so we've tried to align it with. We have aligned it with voting precincts to incorporate as many people that are library users as possible without impeding upon any other municipality or jurisdiction.
but presumably anybody would still be welcome to use the library.
Oh, yeah. And we give out cards, I mean, we give out roughly 30 plus new cards a day, close to 12,000 a year. Some of those cards are for people who are not housed, that we don't track residents on them. We allow for people to come in and use the computers without giving us identification. They can get a temporary card and use the computers on a daily basis. None of that, well, it would obviously it would be a decision of a board, but I don't imagine that any of that would change.
Before we see if there's any questions from the audience, is there anything any panelist would like to come back to or that you feel like we haven't touched on in enough detail? Mary?
One of the major concerns that came up when we were in the process of forming the district was what would happen to the staff, what would change, what about their salaries, what about all of the different pieces of that. And we worked with the city to ensure that really the transition was seamless. You know, at the end of December, they were employees of the city of Fort Collins. On January 1st, they were employees of the district. The district board contracted with the city of Fort Collins for all of these services that ensured that it was a seamless process. So we contracted for human resources and hiring and purchasing and IT and all of those things that the library was already using as part of the city of Fort Collins. And so, you know, the library district, since we were receiving our own funding, then contracted with the city and paid the city funds to provide those services. So we were paying our fair share. And the employees, you know, really did not see any change going from one to the other.
And what did Fort Collins do with the money that was freed up in the budget? Just absorbed into various other programs?
Yes, very quickly.
Imagine, yeah.
So I'd like to come back to one thing too, Sam. When you had said, isn't this good enough, and mentioned a bunch of really great things about the library. One of the parts that, you know, it only shows up in some ways incrementally on the budget, and it's only recently that we see this in the budget. But the contributions from the Library Foundation, especially over the last 5 years, have been profound. I'm drawing a blank right now, but I think it's close to $2 million over the last 5 years. Certainly in the $1.8 million. The Library Foundation funded the entirety of Building 61. They fund all the programs that occur in this theater. So they have been extraordinarily generous over the last 5 years. I attribute a lot of, the risk money that we have to take a chance and do a crazy program like Building 61, which turns out to be successful, has been because of the foundation's willingness to come forward with large amounts of money for us, and that's been great. Again, we'd have to ask the foundation whether they thought they were in a sustainable position or not. I think they're in good stead, but they have been extraordinarily generous with us in the last 5 years.
You know, talking about Building 61, I was on the foundation when we made that initial gift to fund it, and I admit to thinking at the time, well, this is going to be kind of a neat arts and crafts kind of place, which I know it has been, but I've been surprised and impressed with the connection to startup businesses and the local entrepreneurial community as well. I don't know if either of you or Tim.
I think we've had 70. I think we've had 70 small businesses start in the space in 2.5 years, and I think there's now close to 15 patents pending
Coming out of this
that have been developed out of this tiny little 1,400 square foot space back here, with 3 dedicated staff members and a community that's actually happened. Like there's a community of volunteers and people who are working back there like crazy and making amazing stuff. So yeah, it's a huge success story.
You stole the words right out of my mouth, but I had a chance to speak with Adam, who's part of the Building 61 staff. In about 10 days, they're celebrating their 3rd anniversary, and they do about 800 programs annually. Going back to the points you made rightly about the Boulder Library Foundation, the foundation has made a significant capital commitment to funding and creating these programs. I think about it like seed capital in the entrepreneurial space. The difficulty is these programs take root. They become very successful. People want to go to them and they want to see those programs expand to their local library branch, be that Reynolds or Meadows or potentially up in North Boulder. And then we come back to the question of, well, how do we keep talented staff working at building these quality programs? How do we meet the demand of the community that's coming in to use these services and to take part in what really can be life-changing experiences? Again, it's beyond just grabbing a book off the shelf or a periodical. People are coming here to learn new literacy, both in terms of the makerspace or learning to read for the first time, whether they be a toddler or English as a second language member of our community or someone that's just coming across reading later in life. The programs start, they become successful, and we want to see them continue to grow, and it takes people to do that.
Let's turn to the audience now. You've heard the conversation thus far. Are there any questions that come to mind? And if you'll just say them in a loud voice, and then I'll restate them so they're sure to get picked up for the recording for Channel 8. Yes, ma'am.
So, assuming this goes and it's wildly successful, and in 2 years, every other community surrounding Boulder wants in, can they petition? Is it like lockdown never to happen? Do they form their own district? What happens then?
Yeah, what happens if, assuming this district is created, people see it's working and they want in? What, perhaps Crystal, can turn to you first from the State of Colorado Library System.
Well, I'll say that is something that is addressed in statute. There is a legal process for joining an existing library district. I think there would be an awful lot of conversations happening between the surrounding libraries and the library district board here, should that be the case, but before that were to happen. But there is a legal process for that. And we've seen that happen in other areas of the state. And what that also means is that in most cases, it would mean that the community joining would also join in on the mill levy and be a part of the taxpayer base for the district as well.
And Mary Robin, has this happened in the Buda River? Same boundary?
Yeah, so we actually have 2 libraries that are in our geographic area that had formed their own district that opted out, and that was just a further complication when we set things up. They were both very small libraries. And the other thing I would mention is that people, just because you're a part of one library district, most of us who are library lovers use more than one library, and as David said, most librarians, we don't care where people are from. And so there's a lot of cross-use from different areas. It doesn't, just because somebody forms a district, it doesn't stop anybody from using one library or another.
Yes, and actually that's something that is in the state of Colorado. We do have, in our standards, it's actually listed that public libraries offer library cards, reciprocal library cards to people from other library systems. So that way you don't have to pay another library fee to use a different library system.
Thank you for the question. Other questions? Yes.
Can you help me understand the funding structure? So does the increased funding come from the same level of property tax over an expanded geographical region? Or do you levy an additional mill levy specifically for this district? So how does that function?
So asking for more explanation of how the mill levy will work. If it's not ultimately an increase, it's just spread out over more people, or, I'm a homeowner, how much more is this going to cost me?
Yeah, so there is no proposal at this point, but we've done extensive kind of financial modeling going out. So it would require a new property tax. By my estimations and that of our consultants, it's about a 3 to 4% increase in what you're currently paying in property tax. So if you were a Boulder resident, I think your mill rate is around 89. Gun Barrel is about 91 mills. We would be talking about an additional 3 to 4 mills of property tax. Now, for the city of Boulder residents, you're already currently paying a 0.33 mill. That would probably go away, so there'd be a corresponding reduction another way. And whatever city council chooses to do, either to absorb that money back into their budget or to actually reduce city councilors have brought up both things. Could we reduce the taxes, the burden on city of Boulder residents? They obviously cannot reduce the burden on the broader district area, but they could reduce the tax burden on city residents.
By taking away the existing mill going to the library?
Yeah, and a couple of council members floated the idea of it being entirely cost neutral. So reducing the property tax. I don't know that they're going to go that way because, as you alluded to, nobody said anything to me, but I think there are other city council members who have also, there are many identified needs in the city, and so I think there are probably other uses for that money as well.
Yeah, please.
So it really is a separate tax. And so every household in the designated district that are within the boundaries that these guys talked about earlier pays property taxes the county collects the property taxes and then distributes it out to the various districts, similar to the distribution of funds for, say, a fire district or the school district even. So the county continues to collect those taxes and distribute it, but it is a separate funding stream than the sales tax or any other tax.
Other questions?
How is that rate determined?
How is the,
In other words, if you want people to warm up to the
So the question is, how is the rate determined? And then I think a second idea is starting low, and then I suppose you'd have to go back to the voters each time you want to raise it.
So from our vantage point, we presented to City Council a number of options, including sales tax and increases. So the way we described it was either covering the gap, because I think City Council is unanimous in recognizing that the library is underfunded. So what is that gap? And it's been articulated as somewhere between $3.2 and $6.1 million over the course of that modeling. So if the library were to stay with the city. If it became a district library, the district would be responsible for all of those costs. So I don't think, so the total budget is closer to the 16 million that Tim cited. And so it would have to cover that entire 16 million, plus having expenses for future capital, opening the Nobo branch library and that kind of thing. So that's where we're looking at the number. And you have to make a lot of assumptions. Does property tax go up? Does it stabilize? Does it go down? So there's a lot of assumptions when you're looking at that financial modeling over the course of the next 20 years. But it translates currently to roughly $200 per household, significantly more for commercial property owners. The average valued home in Boulder is less than 200, but there's a lot of $1 million homes in Boulder and $2 million homes. So it averages out to roughly around about $200 per year per household
We had a challenging
to
time.
run the entirety of the library.
Yeah, we had a challenging time determining what the mill levy was that we wanted to ask for in the ballot question. Because just as was mentioned, you want to balance, you want to be able to pay for the current needs, and you also want to plan for future needs. So you have to kind of look out 5 or 10 years, and you want it to cover enough to last that long. We were concerned that if we went back to the voters to increase the mill too quickly, that they'd say, didn't we just vote on this? We just did this. And so we wanted to make sure that the amount of mill levy that we asked for would sustain the district. And it has now for 10 years and will continue at least for a couple more years, and then there's conversation about possibly going back.
Let me ask you, when you took this to the voters back in 2006, did you run into any opposition based on the commercial property tax rates? And I think David alluded to the fact that we have in Colorado something called the Gallagher Amendment that fixes the ratio of commercial to residential property taxes and results in rather high rates, many would say, for commercial property.
And Gallagher does fall harder on commercial businesses for sure. Our business community in Fort Collins, our Chamber of Commerce, did not support the ballot issue, but we were very fortunate. They didn't actively campaign against us. Many of the members of the chamber told us privately that they were huge library supporters, but as a group, chambers of commerce don't normally support tax issues. That's not their job, and so we were lucky. They officially were not in support of us, but they didn't work against us.
Other questions? Yes.
In my opinion, one of the biggest problems with our society is our children are illiterate. When I come here, I don't need a librarian because I can spell correctly. Our children are illiterate. That's what you should focus on.
So thank you for that comment, and it may have been part of the conversation before you came in, the work of the library on both children's and adult literacy. Boulder Reads, the adult literacy program, it's been very successful.
Yeah, it's huge. So 0 to 5 is really our bread and butter. I mean, if you are regular library users, you recognize that the largest user group in the public library is families with children, and especially young children. Story time, gosh, I don't even know how many we do anymore a week, but story time is the primary avenue for teaching parents and children early literacy skills. Last year's attendance at those programs, I think we had more than 70,000. It could be 100,000. I mean, it's our biggest program, so that is the main focus. It's not rocket science, but there is 20 or 30 years of research on the brain development of young children and what skills lead to their ability to be better prepared to read when they reach kindergarten. We focus on those 5 to 6 skills every day in story time, and in the way in which even the space is laid out in the children's room focuses on a number of different literacy skills, which we know leads to a higher third grade scores. The kids who participate in story time and early literacy activities score higher on their third grade achievement exams, which, as you know, Sam, third grade achievement exams are even predictive of how a kid may do throughout their high school career and then their career in general. So 0 to 5 is absolutely critical. Boulder and Boulder County have a surprising number of adults who are also illiterate. We have a program now that I believe is almost in its 40th year called Boulder Reads, where we interview and set people up for whatever their learning goals may be, assign them an individual tutor who is a volunteer, and those partners work together for a year, for a 2-year, just to get past their exam to get in high school, and now offer a high school diploma. And in many cases, people can stick together for 10 or 15 years, I mean, depending upon their learning ability. So the Boulder Reads program has won national awards. We're very proud of it. Gone through a couple of different directors, and it's an awesome staff. Hundreds 100 students probably at a time, and thousands and thousands of hours of volunteer contribution going to helping those people learn how to read. So
Wonderful. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the establishment of the board. Is there a way, maybe this question is I'm not sure, but is there a way where you can assure that the different sections of the district are represented in that board? For instance, like people from the mountain community, or people from Gunneral, Niwot area, people east Arapahoe, North Boulder, South Boulder. I mean, because it's appointed by the city council and the county commissioners, but what if they kind of just want to put their people in there?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you, or can you ensure geographic representation from throughout the district when you create the board? Crystal Shim?
Well, there are a few instances in the state where, some part of the board formation and initial board formation and then the ongoing appointment of new board members is, some of it's regulated by statute and some of it is regulated by the local bylaws. So there's a local decision-making power that goes into that. And so there are a few instances in the state where the board is specifically designated for regions of a large geographic area, so Area 1, Area 2. And then there is just a general effort, I would say, in other large districts to have that representation from the more rural or remote parts of the communities. So we do have several large districts, and I think it's just a matter of what what the decision is going into the initial formation of the board and what the board decides to continue with beyond that point in terms of how they'll get that representation. But I think most library districts would agree it's important to have that representation from throughout the entire district.
Mary and Robin, do you take that into account, or?
I think they tried to achieve diversity on the board in a lot of different ways, and that was one of the ones that was a consideration.
Other questions? I want to come back to you, ma'am, but I want to see if anybody who hasn't asked a question yet has one. If not?
So, in enrolling the community in passing the district ballot when it comes up, or should it come up, what were the most successful ways of enrolling the community and wanting to fund this?
So what were the most successful arguments that convinced people to vote for it? Essentially, in Fort Collins and Larimer County.
We made a great effort to inform the public, the voting public, about the challenges that we faced financially. And we were in a position where we had already cut hours, already eliminated staff, already eliminated services. So that was a strong talking point in the campaign, the fact that we would be able to restore all of that immediately after the district passed, which we did. We also engaged the public in a variety of different ways, you know, the more normal kind of campaign ways of, flyers and all that kind of stuff. We were talking about this earlier. It's kind of fun for us to reminisce about this. We had somebody design a costume that looked like a Dropbox. And so somebody at all of our events, somebody would wear a Dropbox to, and we'd be able to talk about, yeah, we're going to have the Dropboxes back and we're going to have all of that. And so we had some fun events, and they really attracted some great attention.
And just in a little humorous aside, our single most successful campaign piece of literature, and it was absolutely true. We had a picture of a little boy with a really sad face standing by the door of Storytime, and Storytime was full. And we always said that was partly what got us the district. But, people felt the pinch, and they were willing to pay to support those services that were important to them.
In terms of, this is a little bit of inside political question, but did you run into this an opposition that goes something like this? It's nice to have the libraries on the ballot when we ask our city residents for a tax increase. A library has a warm and fuzzy quality and inclines people to vote for a tax increase that might include a bunch of other stuff we don't think about or don't like as much.
Yes, we absolutely had that. Not necessarily in this instance, because the library was on the ballot by itself, finally.
But as a reason for folks to oppose the library
Nobody
out of the city.
Well, nobody really opposed it for that reason. There were other reasons that they opposed it, but the city certainly had that attitude, and the library had previously been on a ballot issue in 2001 that we were paired with we were asking for a new downtown public library, and were paired with a new performing arts center and a new museum, and it looked like a Christmas tree with all the things that were put on the question. And that failed because people did not want to fund all of those other facilities. And so once we were able to be on the ballot on our own question for the library only, it passed at 67%.
Any other questions, folks, from the audience? We might wrap a little early, but I do want to give, somebody else have a question? Yeah, go ahead, just in a loud voice, please.
I've been trying to think of an intelligent question for you guys. You pretty much covered it. Being a fan of the libraries myself, just in general, like back east, we have the Library of Congress, and then of course for the metaphysical people, there was the ARE, I think it was the ARE Institute, Edgar Casey Institute down in Virginia Beach. But just, thinking about the budget and whatnot, you obviously got that handle and you're working on that more with the districts. But like for instance here with the Boulder Public Library, I just noticed a lot of times when I go to the libraries, I'm usually buying a lot of used books, right? And some of those books, you'd be surprised, could be 100 years old, 150-year-old books and whatnot. My point being, getting back to what I was originally saying, was that it seemed like libraries were kind of like archives of information, and I know now with the e-books and they're digitized and everything, and at some point, you don't even need to go to the library. You can just Google it, and there's the book, there's your information. So is the library, is it just a place of information that's slowly kind of diminishing, or is it still a place to have like an archive of information and a resource? And I know with the programs and whatnot, that's what you're obviously constantly working on. What kind of programs can we bring in to make the library more of a viable gathering place and meeting place, and just reading the programming here with the theater, what's going on, so on and so forth. So I was just wondering what you're kind of seeing. I know with Boulder, the rec center has been a great, expansion of resources for folks to get together, but that's obviously physical activity, not intellectual activity.
So thank you. Let me try to summarize, and I'll ask David. With the Library of the World at our fingertips on the internet, how has that changed the Boulder Library and libraries in general?
Yeah, business is booming. I think there have been many times where the demise of libraries has been announced. They talked about it with television, right? So television was coming along, and that was going to be a great information source. I happened to get into libraries in the early 90s. 92 is when I first became a librarian. And I was inspired by the internet. And honestly, if you ask me today, I'm not in any way inspired by the internet. It's mostly a cesspool. But it certainly has transformed the way we do business, right? So in, I think it was 96, a staff member came to my office and showed me Google for the first time. And it was amazing, right? Because there were a lot of crappy search engines that were around. And they showed me Google and it was like, wow, these are great results. And they said to me, the staff person said, should we tell the customers? And I'm like, yes, we should definitely tell the customers. But it seemed like a threat. But I think, the information part has always been part of what libraries are about. But I think you overstress the importance maybe of books and of archives to libraries. Because libraries really, in my mind, were always about reading and literacy. And so it really goes back to that 0 to 5 and the adult learners that I was talking about, and then new forms of literacy. So we see it now with kids, in a robotics program. I mean, it's like 10 kids deep. Good luck getting up there to start seeing them for yourself, because those forms of literacy have changed so dramatically in our society. The library, our library, Boulder Public Library, is a community gathering place. So we have more than 3 times all the rec centers combined in visitors. And people are coming here for a lot of different reasons. I don't question them. Obviously, providing public computing was a big part of our business. Those numbers have leveled out. You don't see a lot of growth there. And the Carnegie Library is our archive, right? So we have an amazing, amazing collection over there. We have, some of the original Olmsted maps for when he drew Boulder. We have a diary from somebody who was at Sand Creek. I mean, we have this amazing repository of information that's there that has extraordinary value to the community and to its history. The number of people who go through the doors at Carnegie in a month is not as many as come through the doors of this building in an hour. And so, I don't judge the value of the place based upon how many people walk through the doors, but I think we're all of those things. There are things that drop off our needs list. We're constantly evaluating programs and services that we don't need to do anymore. Ebooks, has come up and been a huge surprise. I think that now constitutes about 14% of all of our circulation. People are checking out ebooks from the library because we are also a place for ebooks. Placing holds, the convenience of sitting at home and reserving a book on your computer. I have library staff run to the shelf and find it and put it on another shelf with your name on it. You just come in and check it out. That now amounts to like 16% of our business. So, the model is always changing. We're flexible. I'm a firm believer in the importance of the archive, whether the public really recognizes it at the moment or not, or has the time for it. I think it's their expectation that we keep it, that we preserve that history, and so I'm committed to it. But I'm also committed to every little, 3 or 4-year-old who comes in and wants to learn how to program a robot, right? So we're going to do that as well.
Any final questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any problems getting older, like seniors, to come in, or if they would be a hard block to get to vote to increase their property, increasing their property tax, because it's such a big issue, at least read in the camera. So how would you target them, or?
Yeah, so seniors, how would you make this argument to someone on a fixed income about increasing their property taxes to support the library?
Okay, first of all, seniors are huge library users. Secondly, I can tell you by taking my grandkids to story time, you see the need right there for supporting that. But one of the things about being a district is that you have more resources, you do more programming. Much of our program specifically is aimed towards, Fort Collins has become known as a great place to retire. So, the library staff is always evaluating what the program needs are, and that was one specific need. So, I mean, every demographic, I think, in Fort Collins got something from that library district model. They got better services, more programming, more materials.
How do you advertise that, though, ahead of the ballot issue, that this is what you'll get, or?
How do you deliver the message to seniors?
Well, through our campaign literature, and also one of the first things we did was hire a really good communications officer for the library, because part of our challenge, at least it is in Fort Collins, and I'm sure it is here too, is letting people know all the things that libraries do. I mean, I'm amazed, and I know as much about our library as anyone, and I'm still surprised sometimes by the things. We check out cake pans to people, for heaven's sake, and so, they do the best they can. They try all the time, but.
Any other questions? Well, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to make a closing comment. Perhaps Crystal Schimpf, State of Colorado Library and Public Library Consultant. What would you like us to keep top of mind as Boulder moves forward, looking for a future funding source and potentially a district model?
I think I just want to acknowledge that this is a really important decision for the future of the library, and it is about the future. Boulder Public Library has, you've mentioned so many of the resources and services you provide today that are of great value to the community, that are already happening, but it's about looking to the future and how to reach more people, how to provide improved services over a long period of time. And so one of the things from the state perspective in particular that I just want to say is that this is a local decision that is about identifying the best possible solution to plan for the future of the library. And so it's great that you are here to hear about this possibility and that we're having this conversation, and it's been an honor to be here as a part of it, so thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Robin Gard and Mary Atchison, I want to give both of you a chance to comment. You were there when the Poudre River Library District was created in 2006. What would you want to keep top of mind for the residents of Boulder as we move forward here?
I guess I would say, first of all, if you were to ask me what the downside is of forming a library district, I can't think of one. The staff members who were nervous about a change in job status, the city councilmen who were nervous about what was going to happen to taxpayer-paid assets, the members of the community who wondered if they were going to get their money's worth from that new tax, all those have been answered very well. Our library district is a huge success by any standard, and we measure everything that you can measure in a library. How many people come in, how many items get checked out, but sometimes those are not the most important things. Those are not the most important measures, the things that you can put a number to. People love our libraries. You all are here tonight, and all of us up here on the stage, we love libraries. So I guess we're here to tell you that library districts can be a very successful model for making your libraries as wonderful as you already know that they can be. So
I would add that I think it was last year the budget for our library district was over $10 million, and they used that money wisely. The library district model is a very stable, very reliable model for governance. It provides the librarians with certainty about what to expect in the future in terms of funding. It allows for planning for the future services and for the future population in the community. It's a very stable, reliable, responsible model for library services. And I know that it's kind of an unknown to some people and there's a little trepidation, but that's why we're here, is to tell the community of Boulder that this is a totally reliable, successful model.
Thank you, Mary and Robin. Tim O'Shea, Vice Chair of the Boulder Library Commission. Final comment?
Thank you to...
Yeah, sort of let us know where we're going from here with this process.
Yeah, certainly. Just thank you to my guests on panel. Getting to learn from Crystal and Robin and Mary is just always so educational for me as a commissioner who's really had to wrap his head around this process over the last several years. And one of the things that I think I'm encouraged by is that this is a problem that we can solve. And it's, to me, a smarter, not harder. We go to the library for access to information and to educate ourselves and to explore opportunities. At our fingertips is a solution to a sustained future for our Boulder Public Library system. And I'm encouraged that the outcome is measurable and good. And it's something that we as a community can decide to do. Where I see a challenge and where I certainly recognize that there's work to be done, I'm going to share a quote from 1997 The Library Commission, folks like us sitting here in front of you, acknowledged to City Council in Boulder, and I quote, "The commission feels strongly that a decision to do nothing or wait until a later time to address the issue does not resolve the issues at hand and is not recommended." That commission was speaking to their community and to their leadership, asking for a sustained and reliable funding source for the public library system. That problem remains unsolved, and I feel Boulder is capable of so many wonderful things, and we tackle a lot of big problems. Here's a problem close to home that really can shape our future, that we can choose to solve today. I would ask all of you to become involved, learn more about this issue. Thank you for being here, and certainly get involved in our process to exploring a district, and take some time to know more.
You know, and Tim, if somebody wanted more information, where would you direct them?
I would certainly visit the library website, which is fantastic. A lot of great information there. We have a lot of information growing around our library campaign, and certainly all of our minutes and materials of the last several years on commission moving up to this point. The library master plan is excellent. Really go to the library, because there's a lot of great information at your fingertips. I'd be happy to talk to folks more after this as well, and we'll have some resources available.
Great, Tim O'Shea, Vice Chair of the Boulder Library Commission. Last word to the Boulder Library Director, David Farnan.
Well, I also want to thank everybody for being here and the folks coming down from Fort Collins. I deeply appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for coming out to become better informed. Boulder is a informed and engaged community, and I deeply appreciate that. Obviously, this is a topic that's of great interest. I've spent my entire adult life in public libraries. I truly believe that they are the last great unbroken promise of a democratic society. We change lives, we transform communities, we do amazing things. So I'm interested in seeing Boulder come up with a solution that's sustainable. And my interest in this is really just making sure that we are thoughtful in that process. But my belief in libraries is absolutely unshaken. The value of them to a community and to individuals. If you ever have time, stop at my office, because I have 1,000 stories. I collect them of library users and why they believe that they're important, and I take all those very seriously.
Hear, hear. Well, we want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Thanks to Channel 8 for recording this. It will be on Channel 8, and so you can tell your friends and neighbors who weren't able to join us this evening if they'd like to know more. Refer them to Channel 8. Thanks to the City of Boulder. Thanks to the Boulder Public Library Foundation. And how about a round of applause for our panelists? And thank you all.